everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we talk about the week's hottest legal topics. Today, we are going to talk about a voting bill that has been proposed in Tennessee. Now, why is this national news? Stay with us to find out why it's national news and what it implicates with regard to the current politics, with regard to current law, because that's what we're here to talk about. I'm Virginia Tehrani. I am the host and, CEO of the Law Unscripted, which hosts the Legal Weekly Wine. And today I am joined by my colleague and my father, preeminent expert in the Constitution, constitutional law, and the amending process, Dr. John Weil from Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome.
Good to be here.
All right. So we always start with something fun. And because of Tennessee, we had to do this. First of all, you're in Tennessee.
I am.
You are. You're the dean of the Honors College down in one of the best public universities down there. This is right up your alley. And
I actually wrote about it. If someone wants to go to the Tennessee Outlook, I have had a little article in there last week. I'm assuming it's still up on how it is a crime in Tennessee if you're a local official to cast a vote in a certain way. Yeah. To my knowledge, it's unique. I've challenged other people to find something similar to it. The closest I can come to is the trial of William Penn in England, where the jury came back with a not guilty verdict, and they said, keep on trying. And they still
go back and think again. That's wrong. Won't you reconsider? I'd like to do that for some of my jury trials. That would be good.
I understand.
All right. So while we get into this, it is the weekly wine. We're going to talk about some wine. Now, Dr. Weil, you have something very special with you today.
I do, yes. And allegedly it's coffee.
Dr. Weil has one of our tumblers. It's in our color purple, and it does say, allegedly, this is coffee. Now, I won't ask, should I ask what allegedly is coffee in there?
This water is allegedly coffee, right? I probably ought to have some water and say allegedly, or have some wine and say allegedly this was water. I don't know.
Oh.
Go back to Cana of Galilee or whatever.
Well, we should work on that.
Yes.
Well, we're thrilled that you're using some of our merch. Go out and check that at www.thelawunscripted.com. You too can have this coffee tumbler. It also comes in black. Check out our other merch, which is a lot of fun legal sayings. And in the meantime, I'm going to drink some wine. This wine was actually provided by one of my friends, Ashley Skinker of Lead Science. They work on websites and website developments, including for attorneys. And she brought me, it was so kind, she brought me one of her favorite wines. How she knew I also liked red wines, I'm not sure, but it worked out really well. I am going to try to pronounce this. I'm the worst at pronunciation, but it is Barbera.
Okay, what'd you do with the money?
I know.
The money for the French major.
I knew.
Remember?
What French major?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to tell how many years I took French. I can read it still pretty well, funny enough, but the whole pronunciation, it's been a hot minute. This, I think, is actually Spanish or Italian. Maybe it's Italian. That's why it's going to be bad. That's the pronunciation part, right? So Barbera di Alba. I'm not going to pronounce the rest, but I am going to put a link to it in our YouTube description down below. So check that out. It is a beautiful red wine. I've got the 2023, and it is a product of Italy. So we're going to see how good her wine is. And cheers, Dr. Weil, to today's episode. Oh, I totally see why that's our favorite. Yes, thank you, Dad, for trying to get the title of your tumbler into the visual here. I love it. So we are talking with the administration, and it is a question, why are we talking about Tennessee with regard to the nation as a whole? And in my mind, what we're doing here with today's topic is striking at the very fundamentals of our laws, of our legal process, what we can and can't make laws about, because we do have, as a country, as states, we have the right to make laws criminalizing certain behaviors. We also have the right, and Dr. Val, I'm going to have you go through some of this in more detail, but we do have the right to make laws regarding time, place, and manner of elections and voting. There are specific voting rules and rights that we have from our fundamentals. They're not as many as you would think in the original Constitution. Then our amendments and some of the voting right acts. But where does this stand up legally and in terms of our democratic republic with this rule?
Let's talk a little bit about the law. The law. Tennessee is an extremely red state at present. I'm not sure we're quite as red as Utah, but we're fairly red in terms of voting for a Republican. Wasn't always that way. When I came here 35 years or so ago, Tennessee tended to you'd have a Republican governor followed by a Democratic governor. For the most part, right now, we're a one-party state, or one-party dominant state, I should say.
When we were there, didn't we have Gore? I mean, we had Al Gore Sr.
I can't remember if it was when we were here. He was vice president, I think.
Al Gore Jr. was vice president,
right,
but Al Gore Sr.
Al Gore had been, right, and he had been defeated, I think, in the late 60s, and largely because of his opposition or concern about the Vietnam War. But basically, Tennessee tends to go along with what Donald Trump favors. And we know that Trump is trying to cut off aid to states or certain states that have sanctuary cities for refusing to cooperate, having local officials cooperate with federal officials for rounding up immigrants and the like. Tennessee has had such a law, but according to the governor, it hasn't been effective enough. And so he proposed, I don't think he has yet signed. If he has, it hasn't been in the paper yet. But the legislature fairly overwhelmingly adopted a law which would provide a criminal penalty for any local official, that would be school board member, city council member, mayor, who voted for sanctuary cities. And my understanding is you could be sent to jail for up to 3 years, a couple $1,000 fine. And, the problem with the law, you almost use the golden rule here to explain what's wrong, which is if a legislature can pass a law that would make it a criminal act to vote for something, then they could also make it a criminal act to vote for the opposite.
Exactly.
So if you could imagine we had a very liberal administration in power, and they would say any local official who attempts to prevent a sanctuary city could be sent to jail. Right. Voting, as you point out, what's fascinating is there's not actually anything in the U.S. Constitution that guarantees the right to vote.
It just talks about voting.
We have
people vote for senators.
We have direct election for members of the House of Representatives now because of the 17th Amendment. We have that for the Senate. We have an indirect election for the president, and it seems to be fundamental. But the guarantees of voting rights are all phrased negatively. So the 15th Amendment prohibits discrimination on the basis of race and national origin. 19th Amendment prohibits discrimination against women. 26th Amendment prohibits discrimination against individuals who are 18 years or older. But there are a lot of court cases that say voting is fundamental. And, next to freedom of speech, it's got to be pretty, First Amendment freedoms, it's got to be pretty close.
But it seems, let me stop you there real quick, that it seems itself like a First Amendment freedom of speech. Isn't that what we're doing by voting, is exercising?
Well, and what's interesting is it's not a direct parallel, but there are provisions in the U.S. Constitution, as well as in the Tennessee State Constitution, what's known as the Speech and Debate Clause, which basically says you can't you can't prosecute a member of to make it simple. You can't prosecute a member of Congress for anything that they say during the proceedings, and that's been extended to congressional hearings and the like. And I think by implication, at least, that would also include the right to vote. I mean, if there's no use electing representatives if you're going to tell them how they're going to have to vote. Now, that being said, I want to be real clear here. I think a state probably does have the right to say we're not going to have sanctuary cities.
Sure.
I think they do. And I think that in the case that a city, perhaps Nashville, perhaps Memphis, perhaps another, decided on sanctuary status, I think the appropriate thing to do would be to go to court and get a declaration that either the anti-sanctuary city law is valid or it's not, and then simply enforce it that way. But to say you're going to throw people in jail for expressing the rights of their constituents.
Right.
There's an early case in English history prior to the American Revolution, John Wilkes, where Parliament basically tried to exclude someone for his political views. And he was ultimately vindicated in Britain by saying, no, constituents have the right to elect who they want, and they have the right to vote how they want. Now, that may or may not be constitutional what they voted for, but there is a mechanism short of sending people to jail for doing it.
Right. I mean, this harkens, instead of democracy, to for how many decades I've been alive, that we look at other countries where they're in fear that they have to go and vote for a particular person or regime or party. Because
it was common during particularly during the heyday of communism. And you still see this. Who's the guy in Hungary?
I don't remember his name.
Anyway, it's common to have reports of 90% of the people voted for candidate X. Well, half the time he was the only candidate on the ballot.
Right. And the other half, if you don't, then you're at risk, whether politically, economically, in danger of your life, that if you don't vote a certain way. And that's, to me, the fundamentals of democracy are freedoms to have, to elect, to vote. And I appreciate what you're saying of the voting itself, the discussion shouldn't be outlawed.
And the danger, of course, is what is the beauty of representative democracy? It's that without it, you really don't know what the people think until you end up with a revolution.
Well, until you tell them what to think.
The beauty of the constitutional amending process, which I've written a lot about, is in some ways it was adopted as an alternative to revolution. We have a way of sending petitions to government. We have a way of speaking. We have a way of printing, expressing our mind. And if you start cutting off those avenues, then you're more likely to lead people into violent avenues.
Right. I just keep going back to the fear is, fear of voting, fear of expressing an opinion, especially in places that are fundamentally protected of you can express a view that is First Amendment speech, right? Of expressing a view and dialogue and debate.
It's a combination of, fundamental right to vote, fundamental right of expression, most of which are, outlined in the First Amendment.
It's effectively a freeze on exercising your rights, your opinion, your views in fear of retaliation or retribution. And then this one, I mean, how much more clear of a response is there? The response is you will be jailed. This isn't even a vague threat. It's you will go to jail if you even vote for this.
Well, and frankly, I think that if you were arrested, I think you would ultimately win. But
after how long? After you serve your whole 3 years?
Well, Depends on how
after
good your attorney is.
well, but yes, I mean there is that, but literally, if we're looking at this, when the legal system is slow, and I think in this administration, that's what a lot of politicians are counting on, is that the legal process is very slow
That's what
to
kept
catch
Trump
up.
out of jail.
Right. So at the time, if we can even appeal it, if we can bring it up, are we still leaving that poor person in jail because they're waiting on the wheels of justice to run? And by then, what will it be? This to me is one of the scariest things we've heard legally.
It's disturbing, and it's in a state where people are generally pretty friendly and the like. But on this one, it's just way out, and they followed a little too closely national trends here.
Well, and I think one of your points is best taken of he who has the gold makes the rules. So if someone can be jailed for this, let's just elect another party. So next time it turns around. So it's at the will of the party in power as to how people are supposed to vote, what you're supposed to do, and who will be jailed versus in response.
Something similar happened in England. I've been working this last week on some articles on disestablishment of religion in the early colonies. And what we forget is that England, the freedoms, particularly of religion that we have, came from the experience in England, where one day the official church is a Catholic church.
Right.
The next day, Henry VIII decides that he wants a divorce and the church won't give it to him, so it becomes the Anglican church. And then, Queen Mary comes in and she tries to get it back to the Catholic church. And then you have fight, every king, it's like, well, are they Protestant or are they Catholic?
Right.
And one says you got to take an oath to this, and the other says you have to take an oath that, the sacraments are not the blood and body of Jesus, and another says the opposite. And the American founders fairly wisely said, really, these are not matters that the state should be deciding. Let each individual decide for themselves. Now, sanctuary city is a little bit different.
Of course.
They're not exactly telling you can't think it, but if you can't, if your constituents elect you and they say this is what we want and you can't vote for it, you're in a pretty pickle. So I'm hoping that, to my knowledge, Governor Lee has not yet signed this. I got very good response. I did an article in the Tennessee Lookout, which got a lot of hits very quickly, and I'm hoping I really urge them to try to get it out before the governor signed it, and I don't know if it'll have any effect or not.
Right.
It's every professor's dream that he's actually going to have some positive input in the world.
Well, let me take this in another direction that might be along a similar line, but to a lot of people, it's like, well, sanctuary cities, okay, we're not supposed to have them, right? There's federal law, there's ICE, we're supposed to be enforcing federal law. Maybe this one seems easy to most well, they shouldn't vote for sanctuary cities because they're illegal anyway. Let's talk about, though, drugs, okay? I was a prosecutor for a long time, and I then, before and after, was a criminal defense attorney. And in my mind, I associate this almost with talk of drugs, right? How much of a push has there been in recent years to decriminalize certain drugs?
Right.
How much has marijuana been decriminalized on the state level? Not the national level, but the state level. So this is where I want to start the comparisons for these sanctuary cities. Is nationally, it's still illegal, but in many states it is not. So we're looking at cannabis trends and decriminalization of marijuana. But if we were to say, you know what, anybody who votes for legalization of marijuana will go to jail. You can't even vote for it, or you can't vote against it. Right. To me, that's a very similar issue that it's like, well, that hasn't happened. Well, it hasn't yet. Right. So how many people throughout the country and all the different states have been wrestling with this issue of certain drugs have been illegal for a long time. We have very strict and specific laws federally and in states as to which substances are outlawed, how much jail time you could get for possession or distribution of each. And to do something like this, in my mind, is like, well, now what do we talk about? Can we even question laws? Can we even say, well, we have a law against marijuana, but should we? Let's discuss it. And it it freezes out that debate and that change, like you're saying, with regard to amendment, is maybe we should change and alter different laws. Maybe not this one. I'm not saying yay or nay to it, but it's that dialogue and discussion of what should change, why should it change, and how can we implement it, versus, no, we're going to keep this, and this is how you're going to vote. And then we get into hotter topics of abortion or LGBTQ issues of, if you vote in favor of XYZ, then you're jailed. Or if you vote against it.
So, it's really, it's almost abominable. One of the early analogies, just a story, if I remember, is the one, I believe the first one I've seen it in, but he referred to the amending process as we might refer to the voting process as safety valves.
Yeah.
They're the way to measure and understand public opinion before it gets to the point where people say, government's so non-responsive, I got to take violent action.
Well, and I know not everybody loves my analogies, and I'm not saying we're at World War I, so I'm going to give this proviso like I did last week with one of my other analogies. I'm not saying we're in World War I. I'm not saying we're like the powers in World War I. But what I'd like to take a piece of is what you're saying is one of the, as I understand it, with my lack of strong aptitude with history, is that a lot of World War I that led up to it was the powers, the hierarchies and monarchies and these kingships and those who were taking all of the peasants, look at Russia, is those who were oppressing the working class in favor of their own values, their own gold, their own wealth, their own kingdoms, ahead of those that they were supposedly representing. So when we're looking at it, like you're saying, in terms of, are we actually representing, reflecting those we're representing, then there would be an underpinning if we're not listening to those that we're representing. And I think there's a very slippery slope with Donald Trump's mandate of, if we are saying we have a full mandate, that mandate is not from the entire country. And
we have separation of powers. We have three different branches. And what is interesting, two are barely in control of a single party.
Right.
What's a little trickier is to figure out where the judiciary is.
Yes.
But if you go back to an early part of American history where the government controlled all three branches, it would have been the Adams administration. Federalists, John Adams.
I was going to say, which one?
Federalists are still in control. They have majorities in Congress. They have a Federalist president, although they were fighting among themselves all the time. But the courts had essentially been staffed by Washington and Adams, both of whom were Federalists. And so when the Alien and Sedition Acts were adopted, which made it a crime to criticize the president or the policies of the United States, the courts, that never reached the Supreme Court, but one of the Supreme Court justices, who was later impeached, Justice Chase, would go, when he was riding circuit, he would give these lambasting speeches against, Democratic Republican policies and in favor of these laws that would send people to prison. And so it really is, it's a dangerous, slippery slope. It doesn't, you don't have that many people, frankly, in Tennessee that would be voting for this anyway, but you're establishing a principle which is a very, very dicey principle, very, very undemocratic.
Well, we will stay up to date on that. We'll find out this week, maybe even before this is published, but we'll find out whether it was passed and what implications and what lawsuits
It's been passed.
I apologize.
To my knowledge, it hasn't I don't know that the governor has signed it yet,
it.
so it won't become law until it's signed, but it has passed both houses of the state legislature.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. So we'll find out if it's been signed, what, if any, reaction others have had, what lawsuits might have been filed against it by that time, and what other implications it might have through other states and across the country. So we will stay tuned for that. Catch us next time. We are going to be talking about some Supreme Court issues and questions, the dismantling of USAID and the Gaza issue. And again, you may ask, how is this a legal issue versus just politics? And it is hard to decipher the difference right now into what's legal versus what is political. So bear with us as we try to suss out exactly the legal issues behind it based on our fundamental laws and our state and federal laws that we currently have and what those implications are. Don't forget to check out thelawunscripted.com. Don't forget to also like and subscribe this channel so that you can catch our next videos and our next podcast. And we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.